In 1974, a vicious monster roamed across America, stabbing, strangling, and shooting his way through several states. During this single year, he killed at least 18 people and confessed to over 30 murders. Paul John Knowles, the Casanova Killer. Knowles was born in 1946 in Florida. He had 4 siblings, and his family lived in a one-bedroom home near Jacksonville. The house did not have indoor plumbing, and instead of a bathroom, the family shared an outhouse. His father was physically abusive, and one of the children would later report that their dad had nearly beaten Paul to death on more than one occasion. At age 8, Knowles began his criminal career by stealing a bike. Because of this theft and other minor crimes, Paul was sent to a reform school called the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. The school was infamous for its brutality and was shut down in 2011. The boys who did not submit were separated from the others and were then beaten, raped, and in some cases killed. State investigators later determined that 81 boys had died due to abuse and neglect. This violence likely influenced the young Paul and helped him become the remorseless killer he turned into. Knowles' adult criminal career began when he was 19. Arrested for burglary and other offenses, he would spend almost half of his life incarcerated until his death. During this time, he got married to a woman named Jackie Knight, but the two soon divorced. And while Knowles was in Rayford prison, he began a pen pal correspondence with a woman in San Francisco named Angela Kovic. She helped him get released early by helping to pay his legal bills. The two had planned to get married in their letters, but in 1974, when he arrived in San Francisco, she had changed her mind. Knowles claims that his first murders occurred in San Francisco the night he found out that his marriage to Kovic would never happen. Knowles went home to Florida, but in late July of 1974, he was arrested for stabbing a man during a bar fight. He was able to pick the lock to his cell, however, and escape custody on July 26. The next several months would be filled with violence and murder as Knowles moved from state to state. The murders that Knowles claimed to have committed in San Francisco could not be confirmed. However, many of those he committed in the 4 months after his escape from jail could be. Alice Curtis was a 65-year-old schoolteacher. Paul forced his way into her home and then tied her up and put a gag in her mouth. While he was away using her car, she choked on her dentures and was dead when he returned to the home. The next day, when he went to abandon the car, he saw 2 children of family friends watching him. Mylette Anderson was 7 years old, and her sister Lillian was 11. Knowles said that he feared the girls would turn him into the police, so he strangled them both to death before dumping their bodies in a swamp. On August 1st, Knowles picked up a 13-year-old girl named Imogene Sanders who was hitchhiking in Georgia. Her skeleton was found 2 years later in Warner Robins, Georgia. She was listed as a Jane Doe until 2011, when the Georgia Bureau of Investigations was finally able to identify her. One day after the murder of Imogene Sanders, Paul John Knowles struck again, this time in Atlantic Beach, Florida. He broke into the home of a 49-year-old woman named Marjorie Howe. He used a pair of stockings to strangle her before stealing her TV. August 23, 1974, Knowles broke into the home of Kathy Pierce, a 22-year-old mother. He strangled her to death with a telephone cord. This murder took place as her 3-year-old son watched. The killer left her son unharmed, and some speculate that he did not attack young boys due to the abuse he had suffered as a child. A little over a week later, Knowles met a 32-year-old man named William Bates in a bar in Lima, Ohio, on the 3rd of September. The pair had a few drinks together before leaving the bar. Paul then strangled him and stole his wallet and vehicle before dumping Bates' body in some woods nearby where it would not be discovered until October. After killing Bates, Paul used his car to leave the state and travel westward. On September 18th, he came across a pair of campers in Ely, Nevada. Emmett Johnson was 62 and his wife Lois was 61 when they encountered the creature. Knowles tied them both up before shooting them with a small caliber gun. Their bodies were found by a highway maintenance crew a week later in the back of their camper. Lois was stripped naked, suggesting a possible sexual assault. Only days later, on September 22nd, Knowles was driving through Sequin, Texas, when he saw a 42-year-old woman named Charlene Hicks, whose car had broken down on the side of the road. He stopped and offered help, but instead raped her, then strangled her using her own pantyhose before leaving her body at a rest stop nearby on the 25th. The very next day after the killing, the creature was in Birmingham, Alabama, when he met a 49-year-old beautician named Ann Dawson. The two traveled together for several days, and investigators are unsure whether she was kidnapped or went with Knowles willingly. However, she did pay for the pair's food and hotel while they were together. Knowles reported that he strangled her on the 29th of September and dumped her body in the Mississippi River. However, her remains were never found. After the murder of Dawson, there was a brief period without any murders as Knowles traveled through Oklahoma, Missouri, and Minnesota. But the killings resumed on October 19th in Woodford, Virginia. Doris Hovey was 53 when Knowles forced his way into her home. He used her husband's rifle to shoot her and then laid the weapon beside her as he left. Police found no evidence of sexual assault, and nothing was missing from the home, which leads one to believe that murder was the sole motivation. The next would-be victims would be saved by the actions of a police officer in Florida. While still driving the stolen car of William Bates, Knowles picked up two hitchhikers with the intent to kill them. However, he was pulled over by police who somehow did not realize the vehicle was stolen and its owner had been murdered. They let him go with the two hitchhikers. However, he was so shaken by the close call that he kicked them out of his car unharmed. It was at this point that Knowles contacted an attorney and recorded a taped confession of his crimes up to that point. Despite the efforts of the attorney to convince him to turn himself in to the authorities, Knowles refused and continued on his murder spree. The next victims would be Edward Hillard and Debbie Griffin, who were hitchhiking near Macon, Georgia on November 2nd. Edward's body was discovered in the woods outside town, while the remains of Debbie were never found. On November 6th, Knowles met a 45-year-old man named Carswell Carr in Milledgeville, Georgia. Carr invited him back to his house to spend the night. When they arrived at the home, Knowles stabbed his host to death before strangling his 15-year-old daughter Amanda, then abusing her body. 2 days later, in Atlanta, Knowles was drinking in the local bars when he met a British reporter and author named Sandy Fox. The two would spend several days together, but Knowles was unable to perform sexually with a willing partner. She would later write a book about the experience called Natural Born Killer, In Love and on the Road with a Serial Killer, which was published in 1980. On November 11th, Knowles picked up a friend of Sandy's named Susan Mackenzie. He attempted to rape her at gunpoint, but the woman escaped and went to police. When the officers approached the monster, Knowles pulled out a shotgun and was able to flee. Soon after his encounter with police, Knowles broke into the home of Beverly Mabee in West Palm Beach, Florida. He stole her car and kidnapped her sister. He then traveled to Fort Pierce, Florida, where he left the woman unharmed before continuing on his way with the stolen car. On November 16th, Knowles was in Perry, Florida, when 35-year-old Highway Patrol Officer Charles Eugene Campbell recognized the stolen car. When he attempted to arrest Paul, the monster was able to take the officer's firearm and take him hostage in his own patrol car. He then used the patrol car to pull over a motorist named James Mayer and loaded him into the car with Campbell. Knowles then took the men into the woods in Pulaski County, Georgia. He tied them to a tree before shooting them both in the head using the officer's .357 revolver. On November 17th, Knowles encountered a roadblock and attempted to drive the stolen car through it, but ended up crashing into a tree and was taken into custody after a brief chase in which the authorities used dogs and a helicopter. The chase ended when an armed civilian cornered Knowles. That day, he confessed to more than 30 murders to police. However, he was initially only charged with 7 murders. The next day, on November 18th, Knowles was being transported to a maximum security facility with an FBI escort. On the way, he picked the lock on his handcuffs and attempted to take one of the agent's pistols. Instead, Agent Ron Angel put an end to the killer by shooting him dead. The creature was buried in Clay County, Florida, in Jacksonville Memorial Gardens.